This podcast is brought to you by Always Possible.
alwayspossible.co.uk. Hello, welcome to the Possibility Club, where we champion the brave, the bold and the benevolent. I'm Richard Freeman, and today we have a conversation that transcends borders and barriers. My guest is at the forefront of a remarkable movement creating spaces where voices often silenced find a stage to speak. In this episode we reflect on our role, all our roles, in this interconnected world. How can each of us contribute to building a more inclusive society? What does it mean to be a global citizen in an age where technology has made distances shorter, but sometimes paradoxically, the gaps in understanding wider? My guest is the mastermind behind Conversation Over Borders, an initiative bridging the chasm between displaced individuals and the community. With a background in mental health and participatory media, her journey is one of compassion and creativity. Her work not only offers a lifeline of language and friendship, but it also champions mental well-being, digital inclusion and storytelling, and not just as services, but as threads that weave diverse experiences and shared humanity. What is it? What is Conversation Over Borders? It has grown from a response to a pressing need during the pandemic to a thriving social enterprise, a community interest company. There's a story there of organic growth driven by the real-time needs of those it serves, and a journey that illustrates the power of grassroots movements in creating tangible social change, demonstrating the profound impact of empathy, innovation, and relentless dedication. This is the Possibility Club, where conversations are more than just words. They're bridges to a better world of practical bravery in business, in society. And in this episode, I'm delighted to introduce you to Colette Batten-Turner. Hello, this is the Possibility Club, and I'm Richard Freeman. Welcome, and thank you for lending me your ears for a short amount of time. The Possibility Club Practical Bravery series is looking at change and impact and the people who are daring to care enough to roll their sleeves up and have a go, whether it's in business, in education, in politics, in the charity sector. It's those that are changing the world one small decision at a time. And this week, absolutely no different. I am delighted that my guest is Colette Batten-Turner from Conversation Over Borders, a remarkable charity or organisation that is supporting conversations between displaced people and refugees and the rest of us, essentially, who need to better understand, connect with, befriend and provide company and companionship and conversation with those that have fled persecution. What a brilliant and topical thing it is to be discussing this as the world burns, literally, and so many people are seeking new homes with different levels of welcome. Colette, firstly, how are you today?
Hi, Richard, and thank you so much for having me on the podcast. It's really great to be here. I am doing well, thank you. I'm looking out of the window at quite a cloudy sky, but other than that, I'm feeling okay. And yeah, it's Monday morning, so lots to be kind of thinking about and cracking on with this week, but it's feeling like a positive week rather than an overwhelming one, which is nice.
Good. So you're not jaded and weighed down with the sheer weight of existence and a week of endless overwhelm. We'll wait till Wednesday for that to happen.
Yeah, wait until a bit later in the week, I think, for that. I'm feeling good at this point, but admit that it could change at any given moment. But for now, keeping it positive for sure.
Tell me a little bit about yourself. It's no light decision to become the CEO of an organisation like this. So tell me what kind of led you here in terms of kind of experience, in terms of mindset, in terms of decisions and inspiration.
I do agree with you. It's no light decision to become the CEO of an organisation. And I always half kind of joke that it was never really a decision. It's something that I slightly fell into, but with a lot of awareness that obviously there's been a lot of intention since then in order for us to become what we are today. I was doing a master's degree and working and volunteering in mental health. with another brilliant Brighton-based organisation called Refugee Radio at the time of the COVID lockdown, which is when Conversation Over Borders started. And so I had a background in mental health and PTSD, both through my own experiences and through supporting with running this peer support group, which kind of really led me to like dig a bit deeper into mental health, trauma, like how we overcome it and how we can move past it through community, but how community is really, really essential in overcoming trauma. I was working with a group of people who had been displaced through this peer support group, specifically around PTSD and depression. And then COVID happened. And as we kind of headed into that first lockdown, I was really quite concerned about the mental health impact that it was going to have almost straight away. And there were certain assumptions that were kind of being put out there around everyone having a safe space, like a safe home to stay in, which obviously isn't the case for many people, and wasn't the case for many of the people that I was working with in this group. I was working with a lot of people who've been displaced and were at that time in temporary or emergency accommodation, which can be quite harrowing places to stay, specifically. Also, if you have an experience of trauma or PTSD, it can be incredibly triggering. And I was working with a lot of people who were spending as much time out of the house as they could at that time. So when the stay at home kind of rule came in, I felt that there was a real oversight there, that not everyone had somewhere that it was safe for them to stay. I was really concerned about the mental health toll of the period of time, which obviously at that time we had no idea how long it was going to be. We had kind of moved the group online, but I initially just spoke with the group of people that I was working with, and I was like, listen, everything's got to be online now. Lots of organizations were kind of closing, and I was like, is there anything that I can just do that's online in the meantime to kind of keep a bit of structure going and to keep you guys kind of ticking over, or with things to do to kind of keep going? Because while you're waiting for your asylum, you can't work. And obviously lots of people were off work anyway because many were furloughed, but it was a real kind of loss of structure for lots of people. And unanimously, this group of displaced people that I've been working with came back to me and said that they wanted to improve their English. And my initial reaction was, okay, I'm not an English teacher. I don't have a background in teaching. I don't know, I'm not the right person for this. But sure, I have a lot of friends who have done their TEFL or who have, become teachers. So I'll start thinking about that and pair you guys up and see if that will work.
Mm-hmm.
And so really, to start with, it was just me connecting people that I knew on both sides, people who I'd worked with very closely with this mental health group for about 3 years, so who had really become my friends in that time. And then other people that I knew through uni, through school, through whatever, who were teachers. From that start point, I was kind of thinking about, okay, so who's actually going to get on? Because I want this to be a nice experience for everyone. So started connecting people kind of on the basis of who I thought would really get on. And I guess things just really developed from there, from that kind of start point of seeing this impact of people learning and practicing English together, but how that could really reduce isolation in an incredibly isolating time when it was incredibly difficult to meet other people for everyone because we were all at home, but also how that could connect people who wouldn't have otherwise met. So that's like a little bit, I guess, the start of Conversation Over Borders.
And looking at the team page on your website now, it's a pretty healthy sort of group of people, numbers-wise, and you clearly got people with different specialisms and so on steering the organisation. How did it go from that sort of, I guess, a kind of project or a sort of, a response to becoming a full-blown, an organisation and all of the pros and cons that comes with that?
We grew very, very organically. To begin with, it was a lot of people hearing about us word of mouth. And that was both people that wanted to come and volunteer with us and people that wanted to learn English with us. So there was a lot of people calling me kind of day in, day out to start with. And as that developed, I realized, okay, we need to just get a bit more organized and a bit more structured and bring in some support. But yeah, initially it was a very organic growth. I think I put out a call for volunteers on Facebook, first of all. and had about 50 people sign up overnight. And it was a real sign that like there was a real demand for connection and for learning English as well. But there was also like a real kind of yearning to volunteer and for people to support people at that time. I think all of us were isolated in one way or another. And so it was really about benefiting everyone that was getting involved in the project in the early days. The way that we have developed has remained very, very rooted in the community. So every new project or like program that we've launched within the organization has come from the feedback of our community. So we collect really, really regular feedback from everyone involved, which is, nigh on 1,500 people now. And like really regular feedback, but also we run community consultations and collect a lot of qualitative feedback from everyone that we're working with around like what the barriers are for them in accessing our support and how we can then work to overcome that. And I think because we've remained very grassroots, we have certainly grown, but we've remained problem solution oriented as an organization, where we recognize that because we don't have like a massively bureaucratic system or like haven't been running, I guess, for long enough for that to come into play, we're really fortunate because we can be responsive to things and we can hear what our community is saying and respond to it and kind of set something up that seeks to address that. So, for example, obviously, initially we were just running this English and befriending program, which is still our biggest program to this day, where we pair people up one-to-one and they meet online for an hour or two a week for 8 months and practice English and become friends really more often than not. And in kind of like working on what the barriers were for people in accessing that, an obvious one is digital exclusion. And that was something that came up time and time again. It was people wanted to be involved, but they didn't have the tech or they didn't have good internet connection in the home office housing that they were in, or they hadn't actually used like video call or anything before, which, if we think about how much Zoom has exploded since the lockdowns, like many of us hadn't really used it before. Mm-hmm. So we started collecting donations of people's secondhand phones and laptops and tablets. And then we began kind of beginning to refurbish them a little bit with the help of some tech volunteers. And then we knew that we needed to really securely wipe them of data. So we set up a partnership with UWipe and get them all really deep cleansed and wiped of data. And then we redistribute them. And we've received a lot of SIM cards through Vodafone, who have an incredible Charities Connected scheme. So we're able to give people data-loaded SIM cards to connect. Now we're just actually about to pilot and launch a digital skills program, which will be like one-to-one tutoring specifically around like basic and then intermediate digital skills with another organisation called Screenshare UK. And this all like really just came from the feedback of people being like, I want to come and learn English. I think it would be really beneficial, but I don't have a phone, or like I haven't used this before and I don't know how to do it and I don't feel confident in doing it. It's like, okay, well, we have the opportunity to respond to that, so let's do it. And initially it kind of started with very much like individual, someone's got a secondhand phone in their drawer, just like bring it in and we'll try and do it that way. And a lot of people do have secondhand phones in their drawer, so that is one way of doing it. But we've also been really fortunate to now kind of set up a couple of partnerships with different companies and organizations who will give, when their laptops and phones are refreshed yearly for some companies, they'll then donate some to us of the old lot and we'll again securely wipe them and then redistribute them. So that's been kind of one way that we've really just developed, and that's a whole like freestanding program in its own right now within the organization, but we've really developed from just the feedback that we receive and just try to be really responsive to it.
One metric of success, and would be a perfectly reasonable one that people could attribute to you, is that you take people, displaced people for whom English is a second language, and therefore that's a barrier, and you help them improve their English to whatever level. That could be what success looks like, but it sounds like you've got this kind of research and development kind of mentality, this sort of, okay, so what are the secondary barriers? Or, okay, the more we do this, the more we realize other things are in the way. So it's a bit of an iterative process. You said it's very responsive, but does that make it harder then to sort of say, well, success looks like this, and in a year's time we will have achieved X, Y, Z, when actually there's so many different threads to it and different parts to it. Whilst the impact is enormous, talking about it might be actually quite a lot harder. You've not got that one clear cut through thing that people go, that's what these guys do, because there's so much. Is that true?
I think that's a really interesting point you picked up on, because it's something we've been having really quite active discussions about over the last 6 months in particular. And yeah, I would absolutely say so. So we've just passed our 3-year birthday. And in that time, what we have offered, and therefore the metrics by which we measure our success, have shifted so much. But I think we've really been trying to hone back into, okay, but what actually is it that we're trying to achieve as an organization? Because everything that we're doing is feeding into that mission. And that mission is not a small one. Mm-hmm. It's about building connected communities, basically. And it's about challenging a negative connotations around migration in the media landscape, but at the same time, ensuring that people have the chance to just connect as people. Because I think that's where we see a real narrative shift and a real change, is when people sit down, they have conversations like we are right now, one-to-one, and they just get to know someone. And I think that's when you can really see a big shift in perception and a big shift in, okay, I might be hearing about these people arriving by small boats in the newspaper, but actually I've just made friends with someone on Zoom or whatever, and they don't fit into this kind of quite one-dimensional narrative that I'm hearing.
Yeah.
And so I guess as that's our kind of target, and that's our mission, how you measure that in terms of impact is immensely challenging, because there's so many factors to it. And yeah, it's certainly not a small shift that we're trying to create.
No.
This podcast is brought to you by Always Possible. But who are we?
Always Possible works with ambitious businesses, charities, and public services that are thinking about what's next.
From architects to aerospace companies, puppet theatres to primary schools, business networks to big data analysts.
If you're wanting to be brave with some big decisions, or to be clearer about what to prioritise, then an award-winning workshop from the Always Possible team is a brilliant starting point.
We care about just one thing: building ideas that work.
For creative, intuitive, and practical expertise, consider Always Possible as your strategic partner. Find out more about how we could power up your mission. Visit alwayspossible.co.uk.
alwayspossible.co.uk.
And I'm interested in, you said you founded the organisation in Brighton and Hove 3 years ago. Now, Brighton and Hove has an interesting position, I think, nationally within the UK in terms of its sort of story around displaced people, refugees, asylum seekers, and is often in the news for one of two reasons, good or bad. One, it's the good news, City of Sanctuary, lots of strong organisations like yours, but also people like the Hummingbird Project and Voices in Exile. And it doesn't seem there's a shortage of compassion. It seems that there's political buy-in. People like Caroline Lucas has been a real advocate for support for asylum seekers. But then on the other hand, you have the Home Office using hotels in Hove to house unaccompanied children. We know that many have gone missing. The city's got these kind of hidden or unknown places where homeless people and people seeking asylum are kind of placed and seemingly not supported. And I've spoken to many people in the city going, well, if only we knew, we might be able to have supported them differently. And it's almost like the Home Office is working against the structures of the cities like Brighton and Hove. So then you have a battle between the council and the Home Office, and it just feels like this is what an incredible waste of energy. But more broadly, we know what the Home Office are trying to do at the moment, and that is to not support asylum seekers. It's to reduce to as little as possible the number coming in. So with that in mind, do you think that many people stepping forward really early on, people asking for help, people offering help, do you think that you would have the organisation that you have now And do you think it would have had the success and the impact that it's had if you'd started it somewhere else? Do you think there's something about Brighton and Hove and the sort of ingredients in that city with its strong voluntary sector and frustration and activism and whatever that perhaps means organisations like yours can accelerate?
Yeah, wow, so much to to talk about and unpack.
Massive macro question there.
I want to remember some of the things you said to come back to, actually, because I have quite strong opinions on the relationship between the Home Office and the council and the voluntary sector in Brighton and Hove, but also more nationally. In answer to that question, I think we are in an incredibly privileged position in Brighton and Hove of having a really strong kind of community of people who are willing to support and are willing to get involved in different things. And I do think that certainly was really helpful. I think it was also in many ways helpful that at the time I was finishing my master's degree. So I was also very connected with the student community, who I do think in Sussex and Brighton, but I also think in many other places as well, have the kind of the time, the energy, the idealism, all of these things to be like, yeah, of course, I'll volunteer or I'll do something if it's kind of presented to them. The thing that was really helpful for me about starting this in Brighton and Hove is that, as you mentioned, there is a really strong voluntary sector and everyone works really collaboratively, which is something that is not like nationwide whatsoever. There can be a lot of competition in the voluntary sector between different organisations, particularly around, competing for funding or things like that. And that's something that, while I've seen that in other places, I don't see that as much in Brighton and Hove at all. I think there's a real spirit of collaboration, communities that kind of feel rooted in activism and in welcoming people as well. I would say, though, that I have seen really great projects similarly spring up in other places. And while we do have a special environment in Brighton and Hove, I also think that it's just about anywhere where people feel connected to a community. And if they feel that they have a strong community link to a place and they see others who are struggling to access that or are being, perhaps not looked after, for example, by the Home Office in the way that they should be, people tend to pull together to try and do something. And I think that's the power that we're really trying to draw on as an organisation. It's like people in general want to support other people. Like if you see someone fall down in the street, most people will kind of stop and see if they're all right or try and help them up. But the difficulty is when people feel so divorced from an issue, and I'm saying that very much in quotation marks, but an injustice, for example, that they just don't see it as their thing, and they're focused very much on their lives and their day-to-day problems. But when people feel part of a wider community, quite often there is more of a kind of community spirit around supporting other people as well. And I think that is something that's definitely strong in Brighton and Hove. I think it's also definitely strong in other places. And it's something that I really, really, really love to witness is, when I see other projects coming up, we quite often get messages or emails from people like, seeing what you're doing, it's great. I want to do something in Winchester or something else, somewhere random. And they're starting something off their own back because they've got enough of a community of people and they want to support other people that have been placed there. In response to this real kind of divide, I guess, that we see between the people of Brighton and Hove and the really strong voluntary sector in Brighton and Hove, and then, these, what we've seen recently, the hotels that are being used to house displaced people, over 100 children going missing from one of them, and the fact that information kind of wasn't really shared or put out there. A lot of people didn't feel aware of what was happening. I think there is, in general, in this country, quite a massive divide between what the Home Office is doing with hostile environment policies and what people actually want or feel is fair for others. And I think that's a bit of a representation of it, is that part of this hostile environment policy is that people who've been displaced are regularly moved around the country. It's exactly for this reason, so that they can't get embedded into a community that will then look out for them or defend them. And I don't know if you saw this or would remember it, but there was this really beautiful example of community activism in Glasgow. I think it was just over a year ago, where two guys were getting deported and the whole community, and it started like 5 people and then it was 100 people and there was 500 people or something like that, all came out, just gathered around this van all day, and in the end the guys were let out. And that's an example of what happens when people are able to embed into a community, right? People stand up for them. They're like, not my neighbours. No, you're not taking them away. And that's exactly why the Home Office moves people around so often.
You know, it's so extreme, this hostility. And the reality is we're going into a general election within the next year to 18 months. It doesn't feel that they think the public mood sort of necessarily echoes the work that you're doing. You know, there's this narrative that, you know, we're grappling with this Brexitism of small islander, and actually we don't like the consequences of being an island, and we don't like these boats, and we don't like to be the world's sanctuary, you know, despite the reality and the numbers showing that we take an absolute tiny fraction of what most other countries do. That's quite toxic, isn't it? If that is presented that this is public opinion and this is what voters like, and there doesn't feel to be a party that's kind of willing to say no, actually, they need to take a really different approach to this and create more safe legal routes and create more community and integration, so on. As an organization that specializes in, you know, this kind of compassionate work and this building community and about helping people feel rooted and belonging to somewhere, you know, where does that leave us? That must make it even harder for an organization like yours. You know, you might have great conversations with individual MPs that really support on a personal level what you're doing. But how much traction are they going to have if they take that up to the House of Commons to get some wider support or legislative support? Because it feels like everything's moving in the other direction.
It does, and it certainly does. And I think you're right to draw on the fact that realistically, in terms of party politics, we have the choice of 2 to 3, really, which doesn't actually give us much of a choice at all. I don't think that is representative of what the general British public want. And actually, there's been some really interesting polls recently that show that more of the British public have shifted in, for example, in opposition to the illegal migration bill, the Rwanda plan, which has now been deemed illegal. But prior to that, there was more of a public shift against that in the polls than there was for it, which is really interesting because we're still getting told this narrative all of the time that actually cracking down on our borders is what the British public want, and not allowing in small boats is what the British public want. But the polls are actually showing something different. And for most people, that's not a full-on shift to, you know, let everyone in, but it's a shift towards actually we don't want policies that people consider to be unfair. And if we're thinking about like the things that the current political party draw on quite often is like these traditional British values, right? It's like, oh, we, you know, like we're trying to keep to our British values. And it's like, well, actually, one of those values is to be like fair. It's fairness, and it's like challenging injustice. And it seems that the British public don't actually think that these policies that are being brought in through the illegal migration bill and the Rwanda plan, they don't think that it is fair. I mean, who knows what's going to happen in the next general elections, but hopefully what we'll see is some slight recognition that actually the polls are showing that these policies are not considered fair by the majority of the public, and maybe we'll begin to see a bit of a move away from that. But I would also say, because that might sound like a bit of a pipe dream to some of the listeners, that whatever is happening in the broader political spectrum, there's an immense amount of power in the public and in, again, local communities, kind of standing up for people and advocating for people and getting involved on a really personal level and in local politics as well, but more so in community and in taking action to support the people that are around you, because that's where real tangible change can happen on a localized scale. And I think quite often we feel incredibly disempowered by what we see happening in the kind of House of Commons, the House of Lords, the much more far away, it seems, elements of Parliament. Whereas actually we can reclaim some of that power by saying, okay, I don't agree with that. That doesn't represent me. And I obviously will continue engaging with politics and trying to fight for a system that represents me better. But in the meantime, what I can do is I can live the way that represents what I believe in. And I can try and take action to support the people that I know and that I'm surrounded by.
This might be the trickiest question I'm going to ask. I don't know. And you can either answer it as an individual or on behalf of the organisation. But what do you want to be famous for?
I don't want to be famous, so I'll answer it for the organisation instead.
In 100 years' time, people are thinking back to what it is that you did and the organisation did. What kind of one thing would you like them to be saying?
I think for getting people to stand up against the system and against the narrative that is continually dehumanizing other people and othering other people on the basis of where they come from is something that we've seen happen throughout history, right? Like, this is not restrained to the present moment. It's something that happens time and time again. Whenever there's a political crisis in a country or a recession, someone gets othered, someone gets blamed for it. Whenever there's political failings, generally a group that is not given the space to platform its voice or to amplify their voices gets kind of blamed and scapegoated for what's going on. And I think we've seen this happen enough times to recognize now that this is what's happening with the real demonization of people who are migrating to this country. And I think what we would want to be remembered for is kind of, I guess, just organizing the people who don't believe that to stand up and say, actually, no, like, I don't believe that. I will welcome these people into my neighborhoods. I'll welcome them into my schools. I'll support them with resettling into their lives here and getting access to the things that they need to thrive and to rebuild their lives, because we believe that it's fair that people who are fleeing persecution, war, are coming here to seek safety should have a chance to rebuild their lives. And I think there's so many people that believe that and think that that's inherently fair and justifiable. And I think what we would want to be remembered for is being one of the many, many brilliant organizations that helped to organize that into a movement or a community of people.
And it feels to me that, you know, you and the organisation are not one to sit still for too long. There's a sort of a very optimistic and delightful restlessness in sort of looking at how to do things better and differently. What are you excited about for the rest of the year?
Oh, great question. So many exciting things, both quite project-based work and also some really exciting developments that we're hoping to see happen. We've launched and are currently expanding a refugee-led mental health service. So we're currently offering support groups and counselling in Arabic, Farsi, and English. And we're about to expand that into Ukrainian, which is really, really exciting. And I really hope that as that continues to grow, it gives us the opportunity to hire more psychologists that have been displaced from their home countries to continue delivering that support with us, which is the model that we're going with at the moment. And I think more widely, we have just released our first documentary and a book in collaboration with Refugee Radio. And so we've just come out of quite an intense period of taking this documentary around the different cities in the UK and screening it. As we look forward into this year, it's going to be at how we tie these like personal stories of displacement and this creative storytelling angle to creating more of a kind of campaigning or more of a tangible systems change approach to the work that we do, because our work so far has been very service delivery oriented. So offering free services to people and supporting them in kind of accessing the things that they need. And now I think we're looking at this system that we're operating in or under and thinking, okay, it's got to the point now where it's not enough for us just to be supporting people with the things that the government aren't supporting them with, but actually we need to push for a fairer and more equitable system for everyone. And so there's going to be some really exciting things coming up around how we can tie storytelling and amplifying people's voices from this community that we've built and everyone has a story to tell, and has something they want to say, how we amplify those voices to connect it to creating some kind of real change. Fantastic.
Colette, absolutely fascinating to talk to you. Really, really interesting and exciting organisation that you're building. It's great work. Thank you so much for sharing that with us and being on the Possibility Club.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, and thanks for the conversation. It's been really, really interesting.
Thank you for listening to the Possibility Club Practical Bravery. If you enjoyed this episode, do like, share, review, tell everybody about it. Look in the show notes for all the details of today's guest, stuff we talked about, stuff that's of interest, new things to read, new things to listen to. And if you are running a business or a charity and you are trying to accelerate or improve the impact that you have in the world, if you want to be famous for what you do and what you change rather than just what you sell, then talk to us. alwayspossible.co.uk. We want to hear from you, we want to talk to you, we want to amplify and elevate your ideas, and who knows, we might be able to help you feel more confident and clear about what's next. alwayspossible.co.uk. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with a new special guest and a new insight on practical bravery in action.
The Possibility Club is an Always Possible podcast. The interviewer was Richard Freeman for Always Possible, and the producer and editor was me, Chris Thorpe Tracy, for Lo-Fi Arts. Have a good week.
alwayspossible.co.uk